Hit subscribe button like if you dare, and comment your wildest prison food theory, because today, the fluorescent lights buzzed like an electric cage, slicing through the gray walls of the maximum security mess hall. The metallic clang of trays hitting the counters echoed against the sterile, concrete walls. Officer Ramirez walked down the line, a clipboard clutched in one hand, eyes scanning for any hint of disorder. Inmate 472, known in the yard as Slim, stared at the tray before him, a thin slice of rubbery chicken, a half cup of congealed mashed potatoes, and a square of bread that could double as a doorstop. He poked at it, a grimace stretching across his face. Some inmates called it sustenance, others called it psychological warfare. This was ADX Florence, or as the prisoners whispered in guarded tones, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Designed to break bodies and minds, the facility wasn't just a prison. It was an experiment in control, where every calorie, every ounce of water, and every piece of air seemed rationed by invisible authority. Slim remembered the first time he'd sat down here. The cafeteria had been worse than he'd imagined. He'd heard stories of contraband, fights, and inmates bartering for scraps of food. But nothing prepared him for the reality. Trays lined in sterile perfection, each portion calibrated to exact grams. Calories were counted, vitamins noted, and taste. Well, taste didn't matter. It was about control. Across the hall, a commotion drew Slim's attention. Officer Martinez, a wiry man with sharp eyes, was questioning a new prisoner. His tray had fallen to the floor. No accidents were tolerated. "This is a warning," Martinez said, voice low but deadly. "You think hunger is the worst here? Wait until the consequences for defiance hit." Inmate whispers filled the room, a constant undercurrent of fear. Some were seasoned, knowing the daily routine as if reading a script. Others, fresh meat, looked around with wide eyes, trying to gauge the rules, the unwritten threats behind the monotone announcements over the PA system. Then there were the hidden details, the things most outsiders never saw. Behind the cafeteria line, in a steel cage that looked more like a bank vault than a kitchen, the food wasn't just prepared, it was monitored. Every potato, every sliver of chicken, every piece of bread was weighed, logged, and approved by a dietary officer. A misstep meant punishment, and in a place like this, punishment could be physical, psychological, or worse. Slim had heard stories about the meal watchers, staff members whose job was to observe how inmates interacted with their food. Eating too slowly, leaving scraps, or even glaring at the tray could trigger reports. These were logged meticulously, becoming part of the inmate's file. Behavioral data, they called it, but the prisoners called it tyranny. A sudden clatter made the room tense. Tray 56 had toppled as inmate Johnson tried to sneak a cookie from his neighbor's tray. Johnson froze, eyes wide, as Officer Ramirez's boots pounded across the floor. The officer bent down, examining the tray like a crime scene. No words were spoken, but the silence screamed. Every movement in this hall was a performance under constant surveillance. Slim's stomach churned, not from hunger but from anxiety. Even seasoned inmates didn't like the unpredictability of this place. The food wasn't just bland, it was designed to remind you of your insignificance. A teaspoon of sauce, a piece of bread that crumbled at the touch, mashed potatoes that had cooled to cement-like consistency. This was the daily reminder of powerlessness. Yet some inmates adapted. They learned to manipulate the system, trading scraps, crafting meals from tiny portions, and rationing water. Others tried to hide bits of food, stashing them in socks or under the mattress. Every tactic carried risk. Discovery meant solitary confinement, loss of privileges, or, in extreme cases, physical altercations initiated by the staff. A sudden hush fell over the room. The head warden, a tall man with a face carved from granite, stepped in. His presence alone made conversations halt. He moved down the cafeteria line, inspecting trays with cold precision, counting calories in his head, noting inconsistencies. Inmate 472 swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every second. It wasn't just about hunger. This was psychological conditioning. Eating was no longer a comfort, it was a test. Could you swallow the taste, the texture, the monotony? Could you maintain composure while someone watched your every bite? The room felt like a theater of control, and every inmate was an unwilling actor. Then came the rumor. A contraband delivery was spotted 2 floors below. Everyone knew what it meant. The undercurrents of rebellion, subtle at first, now rippled through the hall. Eyes darted, whispers grew, and tension coiled like a snake ready to strike. Slim's pulse quickened. Even the smallest crack in the warden's control could lead to chaos. Slim had an idea. He noticed a small crack beneath the kitchen doors, barely visible, leading to a storage corridor. Food carts moved through there every morning. If someone could intercept one, they might redistribute items among trusted inmates, creating a minor upheaval in the cafeteria hierarchy. But the risk, discovery, was monumental. One misstep, and the consequences could spiral beyond anything. Officer Martinez approached, scanning faces. Slim froze, pretending to adjust his tray, heart pounding. Martinez's gaze lingered on him, calculating, assessing. The slightest twitch could be interpreted as defiance. Martinez nodded slightly and moved on. Relief surged, but the tension never fully eased. Then the unthinkable happened. Inmate Johnson, already flagged for his previous tray mishap, suddenly lunged toward the storage crack, attempting to snatch a hidden bag of contraband. Alarms blared, lights flashed red, and the cafeteria erupted into chaos. Officers shouted commands, and panic swept through the room. Trays toppled, chairs screeched against concrete, and the smell of fear mingled with the industrial scent of the food. Slim watched, wide-eyed, as Johnson was subdued. But in the chaos, a small envelope fell from the ceiling vent near the storage corridor. White, marked with red ink, and sealed with a symbol only a few inmates recognized. Curiosity and dread collided in Slim's mind. The warden had been meticulous, yet something had slipped through. Something that might expose secrets the administration desperately wanted buried. The envelope slid across the floor like a silent warning. Slim glanced around. Everyone was distracted. Officers wrangled Johnson. Inmates ducked under tables. Some tried to salvage trays. No one noticed the envelope but him. It beckoned, a dangerous promise, a gateway to truths buried beneath the bland, calculated monotony of the prison diet. Slim inched closer, heart hammering. One misstep, and the consequences could destroy him. He knew better than to trust his instincts entirely, yet the compulsion to see the contents overwhelmed fear. As he reached for it, the cafeteria lights flickered, shadows dancing across walls lined with surveillance cameras. Every eye, human and electronic, seemed to fixate on him. He paused, breath caught in his throat, knowing the choice he made now could change the course of his life. And then, the envelope slipped from his grasp, sliding under the metal divider of the cafeteria line. Slim's fingers brushed against it, cold, crisp, with an unmistakable weight. What was inside? Who had risked so much to send it here? The warden's voice cut through the chaos. Everyone stay in your seats. Now. His tone was ice. Immediate compliance or consequence. Slim backed away slowly, every sense on high alert. He glanced at the envelope, a flash of red ink peeking out, whispering secrets he wasn't ready to hear. The cafeteria, once a place of monotonous punishment, had transformed into a labyrinth of intrigue and danger. He knew, in that instant, that the daily diet, bland, controlled, oppressive, was only the surface. Beneath it, layers of secrets, betrayals, and unseen strategies existed, and they were as carefully measured as the food on the trays. Slim's pulse raced. The envelope represented opportunity and risk. And in ADX Florence, risk always carried a price. The camera angle from the surveillance feed shifted, catching the envelope sliding under the metal. For the first time, the meal had become a message. The screen cut to black. But when the security officer finally lifted the divider to retrieve the envelope, what they found changed everything. The envelope's presence lingered like a shadow in the back of Slim's mind. That night, in the isolation of his cell, he replayed every detail. The cafeteria had been a controlled chaos, but the slip of paper, sealed, marked in red, was more than contraband. It was a breadcrumb leading somewhere dangerous, somewhere forbidden. He waited for lights out, every sound amplified in the concrete confines of ADX Florence. The hum of ventilation, the distant shuffle of guards, even the faint drip of water from the ceiling, all became signals in a silent, tense symphony. Finally, the lights dimmed. Slim slid from his bunk, careful to avoid the squeak of the metal frame. The envelope had been tucked under the divider, but he had memorized its location. As he reached for it, a shadow moved behind him. Another inmate? A guard? Slim froze. The sound of slow, deliberate breathing filled the narrow corridor. Then a voice, low and sharp, whispered, "You found it, didn't you?" It was Marquez, a lifer with reputation for surviving every scheme, every snare in the prison. "Careful," Marquez hissed, eyes darting toward the corridor. "Not everyone wants that in the wrong hands." Slim nodded, understanding the weight of the warning. Marquez slid the envelope from the divider and handed it to him. The paper was stiff, heavy with secrets. Inside, he discovered coded messages, a roster of names, dates, and a series of locations in the prison's underbelly. It wasn't just a note. It was a map, a ledger, a key to the hidden network thriving beneath the surface of institutional control. The implications were terrifying. Every movement in ADX Florence was monitored, every interaction logged. Yet somehow, someone had slipped this past the cameras and guards, a breach in the armor of the Supermax. Slim and Marquez convened in whispers over the next several nights, piecing together the puzzle. The notes hinted at smuggling operations, secret communications with outside contacts, and the subtle manipulation of staff. It was a web, delicate but intricate, built on fear, trust, and the constant threat of exposure. Then came the first test. One of the names, Inmate 812, was rumored to control a minor food distribution chain, trading scraps for favors, messages, and protection. Slim and Marquez had to approach carefully. Too bold, and the consequences would be immediate. Too cautious, and the opportunity might vanish. They moved in shifts, watching patterns, the timing of tray deliveries, the routes of guards, the blind spots in surveillance cameras. Every step was rehearsed, every gesture calculated. The Supermax was a chessboard, and they were pawns moving at the edge of danger. It was during one of these nightly observations that they discovered a hidden storage hatch beneath the kitchen floor. Narrow, covered by a steel plate, almost invisible. The envelope had been pointing them here, all along. Slim's hands trembled as he pried the plate loose. Below, a small tunnel wound through the prison's underbelly, lined with forgotten tools, food scraps, and hidden compartments. The smell was pungent, a mix of rot and the metallic tang of rust. Slim swallowed hard, descending into the shadowy corridor. Marquez followed, flashlight cutting through the darkness, revealing messages scratched into the walls, markings only initiates could read. This was a secret network, older than anyone imagined, surviving by silence and cunning. Weeks passed. Slim and Marquez delivered coded communications, learned to anticipate guard rotations, and navigated hidden passageways. The envelope was their guide, but each movement carried risk. One misstep could lead to solitary confinement or a violent response from guards, trained to maintain control at all costs. One night, Slim discovered something unexpected, a stash of meals, preserved and hidden in an airless compartment. The meals, meant for prisoners, were being intercepted by someone within the network. It was a revelation. The monotony of prison food wasn't just psychological control, it was leverage, a tool used to manipulate inmates, maintain hierarchies, and enforce loyalty. The deeper Slim and Marquez delved, the more dangerous it became. A guard, Officer Harlow, had started noticing irregularities, trays missing, movements outside schedule, subtle signs of coordination among inmates. Harlow's suspicions grew daily, and the tension escalated. One wrong glance, one misplaced tray, and their underground operation could unravel entirely. Then came the betrayal. One night, a trusted inmate approached Slim with a proposal: sell the location of the hidden stash in exchange for privileges. Slim felt the trap immediately. The offer was a test, a measure of loyalty. He feigned interest, gathering information while concealing intentions, knowing that any wrong move could ignite chaos. A coded message arrived that night, slipped under the cell door. Meet at the west corner. Midnight. Alone. Slim recognized the handwriting. It was from a higher-up in the network, someone who had orchestrated movements long before the envelope appeared. This was no longer about meals or survival, it was about power, influence, and information. Slim's pulse raced as he approached the designated corner. Shadows clung to the walls, every step echoing in the silent corridor. A figure emerged from the darkness, face obscured by the hood of a sweatshirt. It was the architect, the unseen force behind the network. "You've done well," the figure said, voice low, commanding. "But the envelope is only the beginning. What you choose to do next will define everything. One misstep, one betrayal, and you'll disappear." The conversation ended abruptly. Slim returned to his cell, mind spinning. The reality was clear. The Supermax was a battlefield of control, and food, once dismissed as trivial, was the currency of manipulation. Every meal, every tray, every calorie was a weapon, a tool wielded by those in power to maintain dominance. The next morning, the cafeteria seemed unchanged. Inmates lined up, trays clanged, officers monitored, and the warden moved with his usual cold precision. Yet beneath the surface, Slim knew the truth. A network existed, secrets were flowing, and his actions, guided by that envelope, were setting the stage for something far greater than he had imagined. As the first tray of the day hit the metal counter, Slim glanced at the envelope hidden in his sock, a silent reminder of the invisible war raging beneath the surface. The Supermax was more than concrete and steel. It was a living, breathing entity with rules, hierarchies, and threats hidden in every shadow. And the envelope, a simple piece of paper, had unleashed a chain of events that no inmate or guard could have predicted. Slim barely slept that night. The envelope had changed everything. What had started as curiosity about prison meals had morphed into a labyrinth of secrets, lies, and unseen power. Every creak in the concrete, every shadow cast by the harsh fluorescent lights, felt like a threat. He knew the architect of the network was watching, testing, calculating. One misstep could end him, and likely Marquez as well. The morning bell rang with deafening precision, echoing through the steel corridors. Slim moved carefully, envelope tucked inside his uniform. He could sense the tension around him. Fellow inmates whispered in half-formed sentences, glances exchanged over the clang of metal trays. Harlow, the officer who had been observing the irregularities, prowled the hallway with a predator's patience. Slim's first step toward action came during breakfast. He noted patterns in the guards' rotations, the timing of tray deliveries, and the subtle signs of inmates' interactions, signals, nods, and prearranged gestures that mapped the underworld of ADX Florence. Each detail had been a piece of the puzzle he now held in his hands. Marquez appeared beside him, a silent sentinel. "It's time," he said, eyes sharp, scanning the mess hall. "We either control it or it controls us." Their plan was audacious: expose the network's manipulation, regain leverage, and, most importantly, secure the hidden stash that had become the power node of the operation. Slim had memorized the coordinates, the hidden hatch, and the secret compartments. He had also memorized the messages carved into the walls, clues the architect had left for those deemed worthy, but deadly for those unprepared. They moved that night with calculated precision, slipping through shadows and blind spots. The hatch awaited beneath the kitchen floor, as cold and silent as a tomb. Slim pried it open, Marquez following, flashlight illuminating the tunnel lined with messages and hidden compartments. Each step brought them closer to revelation and danger. Inside, they found more than meals. There were records, logs of trades, coded messages exchanged with the outside world, and evidence of bribery among guards. The network had been feeding on control, power, and the desperation of men confined by steel and stone. This was not merely survival, it was domination, hidden in plain sight. But the confrontation was inevitable. Officer Harlow appeared at the tunnel's entrance, gun drawn, eyes blazing. "I should have known," he hissed. "You think you can play in shadows and escape notice?" Slim's heart raced. Marquez raised a hand, signaling calm. "It's bigger than us," Slim said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline. "We're exposing the truth. You can either be part of it or part of the problem." Harlow's jaw tightened. He advanced, slowly, calculating, aware of the inmate's knowledge of every blind spot. The standoff was electric, every second stretching impossibly. Then, without warning, Marquez tossed a container of preserved food, creating a clatter that distracted Harlow just long enough for Slim to press a hidden alarm in the wall, a mechanism that alerted internal security. The noise brought reinforcements. Guards swarmed, but by then, Slim had secured copies of the records, hidden safely in his uniform. Harlow, realizing the network's reach exceeded his understanding, hesitated, giving Slim and Marquez the chance to disappear into the shadows of the corridors. Over the next hours, chaos unfolded. The warden demanded explanations. Guards were interrogated. Inmates whispered about the unseen war beneath the meals, rumors spreading faster than anyone could contain. Slim and Marquez remained unseen, but the network's influence had shifted irrevocably. By dawn, the Supermax was changed. Not structurally, not physically, but in awareness. The envelope had sparked a revolution of knowledge, a realization that even in the most controlled environment, power could be manipulated, leveraged, and exposed. The meals, once symbols of control, had become tools of revelation. Slim reflected on what had happened. Understanding the danger would never truly end. In a place built to break men, he had discovered that information was the ultimate currency, and courage the ultimate weapon. The last note in the envelope remained, a warning, a promise, and a challenge. Control the food, control the mind. But the mind that knows cannot be controlled. Slim smiled faintly, the weight of survival, heavy yet exhilarating. The Supermax had tested him, but he had survived, and he had learned. In the shadowed halls of ADX Florence, the real power lay not in the guards, nor the walls, nor the meals. They lay in those who could see, think, and act while everyone else followed the rules. And for Slim, that knowledge was more dangerous, more valuable, than any weapon. The story of the envelope, the meals, and the hidden network would ripple through the prison. Some inmates would align with it. Some would fear it. And some, like Slim, would use it to navigate the shadows and survive. In the end, the cafeteria trays clanged as they always had, but nothing would ever be the same. The secrets Slim uncovered would haunt the halls, and the whispers would continue. And one thing was certain. Knowledge, courage, and vigilance had turned a simple curiosity about prison food into a survival saga that no one at ADX Florence would forget. The shadowed corridors, the hidden compartments, the network of power, they were all still there. And Slim, wiser and sharper than ever, was ready. The Supermax had claimed many minds, but his would not be one of them. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one, hit subscribe so you don't miss it.